On this edition of Independent Sources, Separate and Not Equal, the effort to address school segregation in New York City, and Vampires of Cuba, a legendary animator is recognized for his seminal work.
Independent Sources, your window to the city's ethnic and immigrant communities. Here's your host, Garry Pierre-Pierre.
School segregation in New York City public schools is quickly becoming one of those intractable issues, like affordable housing. New York boasts the country's largest public school system, an estimated 1.1 million students. But a UCLA study identified it as one of the most segregated in the country. There are many reasons for this occurrence. Some experts say this stems from a time when many northern schools were not forced to integrate after the landmark Brown versus the Board of Education case in 1954. They also cite the fact that integrating a system that is more than 70% Black and Hispanic is difficult. While there are more cynical critics who cite the correlation with schools seeking students who can bring in higher test scores and more money. The City Council has tried to draw more attention to the issue with the School Diversity Accountability Act, but the problem remains daunting. In light of that, at least one student organization has emerged in the Bronx to raise awareness of and address the issue. Zafiris Lebrun spoke to Taylor McGraw, the editor of The Bell, a podcast that recently began chronicling how some students are coping and others are rallying against the problem.
So Taylor, New York City, one of the most segregated school systems, if not the most segregated school system in the United States of America. How did that happen?
Well, I grew up in the South, and when you think about school segregation, that's the region that you think of, primarily because of the Brown v. Board decision, which forced the schools to integrate because they were segregated by law. In the North, they were never segregated by law. They just were segregated. And so that ruling never applied to these big school systems in the North, which today are now as segregated as they were in the 1960s.
Wow. So that's about, the New York City school system is about, I believe, 1.1 million pupils, I believe it's quoted as. So where do you find that these clusters of segregation happen?
All over, but it's, I would say, most extreme in the Bronx and parts of Brooklyn. There are pockets of Queens that have many diverse schools, and in some cases in Manhattan too. But I would say, yeah, Upper Manhattan, so Harlem, Washington Heights, the Bronx, and then the non-gentrifying parts of Brooklyn, are where it's the deepest.
So how does some of this segregation break down, if you will? Let's just kind of talk maybe one bar at a time, if you will. So for instance, in the city, in Manhattan itself, how does some of the gentrification break down? Is it a situation where schools on the Upper East Side tend to have more white students as opposed to minority students? How does it kind of break down like that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whiter the neighborhood, the less likely the school is going to match the demographics of the city, meaning there's going to be more white students, more affluent students. I think District 3, which spans from the bottom part of Central Park on the west side of Manhattan all the way up to West Harlem, is a really interesting case study because that district is quite diverse if you take it as a whole. But as you might guess, below 110th Street, it looks much different than it does above 110th Street. And right now there's a big, I guess, integration battle taking place because the schools in Upper West Side are overcrowded, and there are many schools in West Harlem that are have a lot of room. And so folks are trying to figure out how to, number one, ease that problem, but also at the same time diversify the schools, because if you look at the achievement gaps in that district, it's really extreme. I mean, something like 75% of white elementary students are passing state tests. In the same district, about 25% of the Black students are passing state tests. And so that's, I think, an interesting example of where this is the most extreme.
And now this is specific to public schools, or is it something that's happening, as regards to charter schools and all that sort of stuff, because, as well?
Well, I mean, charter schools are public schools.
Right.
And, you know, I think oftentimes people talk about how charter schools are in fact more segregated than the average public school, which is true. But that's because charter schools take root in neighborhoods that traditionally have had kind of low quality educational options. And so they happen to be in poor neighborhoods with more families of color. And actually I taught in West Harlem at a charter school for 3 years. And so I understand, I didn't teach any white students there, right? But at the same time, I understand why that school came into existence. And so it's complicated.
Mm-hmm,
yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, on the ground, I mean, as regards to this system, you know, folks must know that it's broken, right? As regards to the segregation that exists in these various communities.
Well, I mean, I think the question would be, who is it broken for? Because I think the system works really, really well if you're affluent,
mm-hmm.
right? And if you live in an affluent neighborhood. Because there's such a high degree of choice that students have over where they get to go to middle school and high school especially. There are some really outstanding public high schools, but those options aren't really available to students of color and poor students who live in poor neighborhoods. So I think, you know, when you ask if it's broken, I don't know that we believe that it is
right.
as a city. Or I don't know that everybody believes that it is.
Right, right, right. Is anything being done, in light of that, is anything being done on the governmental level to perhaps try to address the issue at all?
Of segregation in
mm-hmm.
particular?
Mm-hmm.
There has not been, to my knowledge, a comprehensive plan put forth by the school's chancellor or the mayor. I know that there are groups that would like to see one and have pressured them to do that, but I haven't seen it. I mean, the most that we've heard, I think, is that the chancellor would like to see what she called organic solutions to arise to combat this problem, which in my mind is strange because this was not, like, it never arose organically, right? I mean, this was a systematic separation of students. And if we're going to combat this, it's got to be done at a system level, because if you rely on individual schools to try to solve it, that particular school might become more diverse or integrated, but the one next to it becomes more segregated as a result. And so I think I would like to see a comprehensive plan put forth.
Mm-hmm. In light of the fact that, you know, there's no comprehensive plan as yet, but what there is that we know of is, you know, various grassroots level efforts to do that, and one of them was launched recently by a number of students coming out of the Bronx. Could you talk a little bit about that program, please?
Talking about Teens Take Charge.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, this kind of happened. This did happen organically. I work with a number of high school students, both the students that I teach at my high school, but also through a nonprofit called Sponsors for Educational Opportunity. It's a college prep program for underprivileged students in the city. And, you know, I've interviewed some of those students for my podcast, The Bell, and have had many conversations with them about these issues. And at some point, we decided that we should spread the conversation and get in front of a wider audience. And so the students took to the idea, and about a week ago in the Bronx, we had our first event with a dozen high school students from around the city who got on stage and delivered testimony really about their experiences. And that was kind of the kickoff event for this group that's called Teens Take Charge, and they're amped up, and we're eager to do more events. There's a summit in the Bronx later this week that they're going to participate in, and so we're excited to see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Now, you know, one of the things in your podcast that you mentioned, which is called The Bell, we'll get to that in a minute, but one of the things that struck me when I was listening to the podcast was the fact that you were on a walk with some of your students, and they said, you know, the students over there, are the students aware of that segregation? Is that something that's kind of in the front of their minds, that, hey, listen, we are apart from folks who don't necessarily look like us?
I think that's embedded deep in their psyches. I think they've known that since they were born. But the issue is we don't really talk about it. And so that's why when I heard that comment from this girl who I taught, African-American girl, who looked across the street and said, hey, look at those kids of that other race, referring to white kids. It struck me in that moment that this is their reality, but we're not talking about it. And why is that? And that's really what led me to create this podcast, where I try to elevate those voices and turn this into a conversation, a long overdue conversation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And yet, and to the bell now, you know, we were talking beforehand about how it emerged, but, you know, for the folks who weren't part of that, privy to that, just talk a little bit about the bell and what it is and what you're hoping to do with it.
So the Bell is really a media platform that amplifies the voices of high school students in New York City, with really the goal of empowering them to lead the fight for their futures, because this school system exists for them, yet they don't really have a voice in the policies that then directly impact them. And so we're trying to be that conduit between the students who are affected and the adults who are the ones who are designing the policies.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a quick overview of some of the folks that, some of the students that you'll be talking to in the future as we close the interview?
Yeah, absolutely. We have some really interesting stories. There are some students from Harlem that have had some interesting encounters with white students. They go to a school that's 100% non-white, but one of them actually made a white friend playing a video game when he was younger, and has never met the girl in person. Wow. But has sustained this online friendship over the years. And that really speaks to like how segregated these kids' lives are. And then there's a student who is a part of this Teens Take Charge group, but is also a part of a group called Integrate NYC for Me, a student-led group that originated in the Bronx. And she and a handful of students are making it their mission to integrate the New York City public school system. She's quite an activist. And so that's going to be kind of the cap to the season, is to hear her story and the types of efforts that are taking place to change this.
All right. Well, Taylor, thank you very much for being in studio today. And it still amazes me that we're talking about this in 2017, that New York City's school system is so separate. Anyway, yeah. Thank you again for joining us, and good luck to you.
Thank you. Enjoyed it.
Still to come on the show, celebrating the Lower East Side's immigrant history. Thanks for staying tuned. An estimated 15,000 visitors are expected to descend upon Avenue C and the Lower East Side on Sunday, May 28th for the 30th annual Loisaida Festival. The festival is being organized by Loisaida Inc., a nonprofit organization that began as a grassroots effort to combat drugs and gang violence in the neighborhood during the 1970s. The street fair is only one aspect of this year's celebrations that mark May as Lower East Side History Month. There will also be an exhibit of several murals painted over the years called La Lucha Continua, The Struggle Continues, 1985 and 2017. I spoke with Loisaida's Inc's artistic director, Libertad Guerra, and mural curator, Jane Weissman, about the history of the neighborhood and the festivities. Libertad, what can people expect at this festival?
The festival today, this year is a very special one. It's our 30th anniversary of this annual festival happened, so it's become a historical event. What they can expect is a multitudinary experience from music, a main stage, a theater lab, and then the street level experience, which encompasses so many kid-friendly activities, performance elements, obviously advocacy elements from different nonprofit organizations in the area, and and very engaging elements from the El Museo del Barrio to Friends of the Highland that provide workshops for the family. So it's like 3 events in one, you could say.
Is it a whole day or?
It's from 11 to 5. The main stage sounds starts at 12, but we open with a parade that is made by the community. There's a whole month that we're working on at the Loisaida Center with the community to build puppets and a lot of parade-making elements based on characters from the Loisaida neighborhood. So the kickoff parade opens at 11.
Okay. Great. So, Jane, how did murals become such a iconic part of the Lower East Side's culture?
Murals first appeared in the Lower East Side in 1970, so there is a very long tradition. By the time the La Lucha Continua murals were painted in 1985, it was almost the end of community murals in this neighborhood. Murals continued all over the city, but for some reason those collaborations between artists and community groups that had a message they wanted to project seemed to have petered out there. So La Lucha Continua, where the murals and the themes are as relevant today as they were in 1985, were the culmination of mural making.
So the murals will be part of this festival. People will get a chance to experience them.
Well, yes and no. Of the 26 murals that were painted in 1985, only 2 exist.
Oh.
And right now, there is an exhibition that is being hosted by the Lower East Side Center, thanks to Libertad, called La Lucha Continua, The Struggle Continues, 1985 and 2017. Okay. So we will see through photographs and statements that it's still the same issues that are affecting the community. But moreover, the puppet people have chosen 2 of the murals, and they have taken the figures from them and are making puppets. So the murals will be marching in the parade.
Okay, excellent.
Yes, we make it a point to treat history as living history. So every part of our programming, even though we're exploring the narratives of the past, we try to bring them to the present in how they're still relevant. And you know, the festival is kind of the public platform of many of the programming that we've had throughout the years. And this is an intersection point. The other aspect in which it intersects is that La Plaza Cultural, which still houses 2 of the remaining murals of these 26 murals, that's where we host our theater lab. So it's going to be in the same exact place, and people will have a new added context of valuing, you know, these relics that still remain there.
So what are some of the challenges, if you will, still facing the Lower East Side?
Well, gentrification was a major theme in 1985, and it's a major theme today.
It has accelerated even more.
Yes, as has police brutality, perhaps not so much on the Lower East Side, but certainly all over the city. And there are probably countless incidents that we are unaware of. Women are affected by feminist issues. It's harder and harder to get good health care to women of lower economic means, especially with the current administration. Immigration is an issue. In 1985, the concern was getting into this country. Today, the concern is being kicked out of the country for no reason. And then there were 2 international concerns, which were opposition to U.S. interventions in Central America, fill in the blank for other countries, and opposition to apartheid in South Africa. And frankly, we have apartheid in this country. It's just not official.
Okay. So, Libertad, same question. What are some of the challenges facing the Lower East Side residents?
Well, it's a very resilient place. It was the first neighborhood in the front lines of that, what we all know as the gentrification or dispossession wave in the early 80s. The Latino community played a big role in the activism of the era. And even though people think the neighborhood has already been gentrified, there's a big footprint of working class, not only Latino, but people of color, Asians. And this year, our festival is the theme of the festival in our 30th anniversary is immigration and migration. As you know, Puerto Rico is going through a second wave of migration due to the fiscal crisis in the island. And we aim to be, as a center and as part of our mission, to provide a platform for all the voices, the artists, the contributions that they've made to this iconic neighborhood, which is recognized worldwide. But, you know, the histories, those legacies are never given a proper platform. So that's part of the legacies of finding that visibility for all the contributions of the people that still remain, still have a big footprint there. And the festival is a way of presenting that in the public domain, in the public.
So can working class people still afford to move into the neighborhood?
To move in?
Yes.
Well, How we see it is like part of our mission is developing that sense of belonging, because many people who were not displaced sometimes choose to leave because they don't feel that fabric, that network, that social cohesion that they used to have. So even though maybe obviously that has to do with housing and many other policies at a city level, part of our mission is to, for the people that have managed to remain, to say like there is this sense of belonging, a social cohesion, an element of pride of what we've built here. And at the same time, having newcomers realize through exhibits such as La Lucha Continua and many of our programming of what is the legacy of the people that built this place, and have it be layered upon the newcomers that there's this history and now you can recognize it.
Okay. So Jane, tell us, where can we see La Lucha and how long would it be running?
The show is running at the Lower East Side Center, which is at 710 East 9th Street, just east of Avenue C. And it runs through July 31st. And what's really lovely is the venue where all of the murals were situated back in 1985 is La Plaza Cultural, which is just across the avenue. Mm-hmm. So people can come and look at the exhibition, and then they can go across the street and go into the garden, which is open to the public. I think the community gardens on the Lower East Side is one way that the social fabric has really brought people together, both older and newer residents.
This is an obvious question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What happened to the murals?
Oh, well, murals are a very ephemeral art form. Weather takes its toll, wind, sun, rain. Usually a wall could be whitewashed or tarred over because of a leak. If it faces an empty lot, a building goes up. Sometimes the building the mural is on is demolished. Mm-hmm.
All right, unfortunately we're out of time. Jane Weissman, Libertad Guerra, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, it's fun.
The festival will run along Avenue C between 12th and 6th Street. When we come back, honoring the father of Cuban animation. Finally from us, the father of Cuban animation, Juan Padrón, has a career that spans the entire Cuban revolutionary period. His work has inspired an entire generation of Cuban artists. He was recently honored for his body of work at the Havana Film Festival. Judith Escalona tells us more about Padrón and his work.
Yo me propongo, primero, entretener al público, que la gente disfrute el argumento, disfrute la aventura, y se ría, y lo que yo quiero enseñar está dentro de ese...
Cartoonist and animator Juan Padrón is a pioneer of Cuban animation, having produced over 60 shorts and feature-length movies, including the cult classic Vampires in Havana. That film takes place in the 1930s in pre-revolutionary Cuba. It's a fast-paced satirical adventure through the streets of old Havana as reconstructed from old photographs, posters, and comics.
A mí me gustaba mucho los años 30, porque había unos cómics de esa época que tenían unos automóviles y tranvías y personajes muy bonitos. Y yo me basé en esos dibujos de una revista que se llama Caricatos, que era de los años 30, para poner la película en esa época donde la mafia, los gángsters, los casinos, todo eso estaba en Cuba. Y me pareció una época muy bonita.
Ya podemos chupar a cualquier hora, gracias a Pepe.
It was Cuba's first full-length feature animation and received world acclaim when it was released in 1985.
Cuando pasé al Instituto de Cine, en el año 75, hice algunos vampiros animados como chiste, ¿no? Y un productor alemán que vino a La Habana vio los chistes de vampiros y dijo, hey, ¿por qué no hacen un largometraje de vampiros?
He later created a sequel to Vampires in Havana. In 2003, more Vampires in Havana was released. Recently, the 2017 Havana Film Festival of New York honored Padrón with a screening of both films and an exhibition at the Clemente Gallery in Lower Manhattan. Padrón was born in Matanzas, Cuba in 1947. He began providing sketches and cartoons for Cuban magazines and newspapers at 16. When he was 27, he moved from print to film in a career that spans the entire Cuban Revolution into the present.
Cuando pasó al cine, en los años 74, empecé a hacer cortos del Pidio Valdés y hicimos 3 largometrajes de animación y ahí el personaje logró una popularidad tremenda con 3 generaciones de cubanos.
Elpidio Valdés is a Mambi soldier. The Mambises were the guerrilla Cuban independence soldiers who fought against Spanish colonial rule. Padrón did extensive research as he prepared the character's design and story.
Yo empecé a documentarme sobre el ejército español y sobre los mambises, los cubanos que pelearon contra el ejército colonial. Españoles tenían heliógrafo, teléfono, tenían ametralladoras y todo eso que yo no sabía, porque cuando niño, cuando yo tenía 10, 12 años, lo que veía era cómics de Estados Unidos y veía películas del oeste y conocía cómo el uniforme de un soldado norteamericano de la pradera y los indios comanches y los Sioux, pero no sabía cómo era el uniforme español.
Padrón also created animated shorts that were based on original jokes he and his colleagues created. They were called Fin Minutos because many were a minute or less in length. The Fin Minutos attracted humorists from the Cuban and eventually the foreign press who wanted to create similar shorts. The renowned Argentinian cartoonist Quino joined Padrón, and together they created a series based on Quino's Malfada, an outspoken little girl who exposed social and political issues. Malfada was popular throughout Latin America and Spain. At 70, Padrón has no intention of slowing down. He's currently developing a prequel to Vampires in Havana that will take place in the Havana of the 1920s. As for his place among animators in Cuba and worldwide,
pienso que en Cuba sí, yo soy muy popular, ¿no? Me conocen, la gente conoce mi libro, mis dibujos, pero no podría situarlo.
That's for the critics to decide. Judith Escalona, Independent Sources.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.